Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. When my wife and I bought our dream house last year, we thought we'd found paradise. The house was perfect. A beautiful two-story colonial with a big backyard, plenty of space for my home office, and even a small herb garden area that caught my wife's eye immediately. We were both in our early 30s and finally ready to settle down somewhere we could see ourselves staying for decades. I work as a freelance data analyst, which means I spend most of my day at home hunched over spreadsheets and databases. The quiet suburban setting was exactly what I needed for concentration. My wife works for the FBI as a special agent, specializing in cybercrime investigations. Her job occasionally requires her to work unusual hours or travel, but we both valued having a peaceful home base to come back to. The neighborhood seemed ideal at first. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained houses, kids riding bikes. It looked like something out of a magazine. We knew there was a homeowners association, but the previous owner assured us they were pretty laid back. Just basic stuff about keeping your lawn neat and not painting your house neon green. No big deal, we thought. That illusion lasted about 3 weeks. Our first indication that trouble was brewing came in the form of a passive-aggressive note taped to our front door. The note, written in precise handwriting on official letterhead, informed us that our recycling bin had been visible from the street for approximately 3 hours beyond the acceptable pickup window, and that future violations would result in formal warnings. I stared at the note in disbelief. 3 hours. They were timing how long my recycling bin sat at the curb after pickup. The note was signed Brenda Morrison, HOA President, with a phone number and email address. I showed it to my wife when she got home that evening. She read it twice, then looked at me with that expression she gets when she's trying not to laugh at something ridiculous. "Well, this is going to be interesting," she said. "At least we know what we're dealing with now." Over the next few months, the pattern became clear. Every couple of weeks, we'd receive some new complaint from Brenda. Our welcome mat was apparently a non-approved shade of brown. The small wind chimes my wife hung on the back porch were creating unnecessary noise pollution. When I installed security cameras around the perimeter of our house, something my wife strongly recommended given her line of work, Brenda sent a formal inquiry demanding to know if they were aesthetically compliant with community standards. Each complaint was accompanied by citations to specific sections of the HOA handbook, complete with page numbers and subsection references. It was clear that Brenda had memorized every single rule and was determined to enforce them all. The weird thing was, we were actually following all the rules. I'd read through the entire handbook when we moved in, specifically to avoid any issues. The cameras were well within the guidelines, positioned to monitor our own property and not intrude on neighbors' privacy. The herb garden was in our backyard, completely invisible from the street. Even our trash bins were the approved color and size. But Brenda seemed to be looking for problems where none existed. My wife, with her investigative background, suggested that some people just enjoy having power over others, even when that power is completely petty and meaningless. The situation escalated about 6 months after we moved in. I was working from home, deep into a complicated data analysis project for a client, when I heard the doorbell ring. I glanced at the time, 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my wife was at work. I looked at my security monitor and saw a woman in a crisp pastel tracksuit standing on my front porch holding a clipboard. Even through the grainy camera feed, I could see she looked agitated. This had to be Brenda Morrison. The doorbell rang again, followed immediately by loud knocking. I was in the middle of a video conference with a client, so I couldn't answer right away. The knocking continued, getting progressively louder and more insistent. Finally, I muted my microphone and used the two-way speaker on my smart doorbell system. "Can I help you?" I asked. The woman on my porch looked directly into the camera. She had short blonde hair, sharp features, and the kind of expression that suggested she was used to getting her way. "Are you the homeowner?" she demanded. "Yes, but I'm in a meeting right now. What can I do for you?" "I'm Brenda Morrison, president of the Homeowners Association. I need to conduct an immediate inspection of your property." I blinked at the camera. "I'm sorry, what?" "We've received reports of potential violations of community bylaws regarding unapproved property modifications. I need to inspect both the interior and exterior of your home." I felt my blood pressure rising. "I haven't made any modifications to my property, and I'm in an important meeting right now. Can we schedule something for later?" Brenda's expression hardened. "This is not a request. As president of the HOA, I have the authority to conduct inspections when violations are reported." Now I was getting annoyed. I thought about my wife's advice to always create a paper trail when dealing with difficult people. "Ma'am, I need you to send me any official requests or complaints in writing. I haven't received any formal notification about this supposed inspection. The notification is right here, she said, waving a piece of paper. I'm delivering it now. Great. Please leave it in my mailbox, and I'll review it when I'm finished with my meeting. That's when Brenda completely lost it. You do not get to dismiss me, she shouted at the camera. I am the president of this homeowners association, and I will not be ignored by some antisocial hermit who thinks he can hide in his house all day. I watched in amazement as she began walking around the side of my house, peering into windows and taking notes on her clipboard. My security cameras picked up her movement as she circled the property, looking increasingly frustrated. I quickly texted my wife to let her know what was happening, then returned to my video conference. But concentration was impossible with Brenda stomping around outside, occasionally returning to bang on my door. After 20 minutes of this circus, I'd had enough. I excused myself from the meeting and spoke through the doorbell again. Ma'am, you need to leave my property immediately. You don't have permission to be here and you're trespassing. Brenda marched back to my front door, her face red with anger. How dare you accuse me of trespassing? I have every right to be here. No, you don't. This is private property and I'm asking you to leave. Fine, she screamed. If you want to be difficult about this, I'll call the police. We'll see how tough you are when they force you to open this door. She pulled out her phone and began dialing. I watched through my camera as she paced back and forth on my porch, clearly working herself up for her performance. What Brenda didn't know was that my wife wasn't at her usual FBI office that day. She was completing a mandatory rotation at the county's 911 dispatch center as part of a federal local emergency operations task force. It was a program designed to help federal agents understand local emergency protocols and improve cooperation between agencies. The irony of the situation would have been hilarious if it wasn't so infuriating. My wife later told me exactly what happened on her end of that call. She was about halfway through her 8-hour shift when a call came in showing our home address on her screen. For a split second, she wondered if something had happened to me. Then she heard Brenda's voice on the other end of the line. My wife answered with perfect professionalism. 911. What's the location of your emergency? Brenda launched into a dramatic monologue about how she was being threatened by a hostile homeowner who was refusing a mandatory safety inspection. She claimed I had locked myself in my house and was potentially armed and dangerous. My wife, drawing on her FBI training, began asking specific questions to determine the nature of the emergency. Ma'am, has the homeowner verbally threatened you with physical harm? Well, no, but his tone was very threatening. Has he displayed any weapons? I don't know. He could have weapons. That's why you need to get in there. Ma'am, can you clarify what authority you have to demand entry into a private residence? There was a pause. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. I have the right to inspect properties for violations. My wife explained calmly that police officers cannot force entry into a home for civil HOA matters, and that a unit would be dispatched to help keep the peace while the civil dispute was resolved. She also noted in the official log that the caller appeared to be misusing emergency services for a non-emergency civil matter. About 15 minutes later, a single police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. I watched through my cameras as a middle-aged officer approached Brenda, who immediately launched into her version of events. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at my house, and clearly trying to convince him that I was some kind of dangerous recluse. The officer listened patiently, then walked up to my front door and knocked politely. I answered the door and explained the situation calmly. I showed him the previous complaints I'd received from Brenda, none of which had ever resulted in any actual violations. I offered to show him the complete unedited footage from my doorbell camera of Brenda's behavior over the past hour. The officer watched about 5 minutes of footage, during which Brenda could be seen shouting at my camera, walking around my property without permission, and generally acting like an unhinged person having a public meltdown. He shook his head and walked back to where Brenda was waiting by his patrol car. The conversation that followed was brief but effective. The officer explained to Brenda that she was the one causing a disturbance, that this was clearly a civil matter that had nothing to do with emergency services, and that she was officially trespassing on my property. He gave her 2 options: leave immediately and voluntarily, or be cited for trespassing and disturbing the peace. I watched from my doorway as Brenda's entire demeanor crumbled. The woman who had been so confident in her authority just minutes before was now facing the reality that she had no legal power whatsoever. She stomped back to her car, still muttering complaints, but she left. That evening, my wife and I sat down to plan our response. We both agreed that Brenda's behavior had crossed a line from petty harassment to something that could escalate into real problems. My wife's law enforcement experience had taught her that people like Brenda don't usually stop on their own. They need consequences. We assembled what my wife called our evidence package. First, we had the complete video footage from my security system showing Brenda trespassing and creating a disturbance. The cameras had captured everything from multiple angles, including her circling the house and peering into windows. Second, my wife was able to obtain, through completely legal and official channels, a copy of the 911 call audio and the dispatch log from that day. The log contained her professional notes about the incident, including her assessment that the caller appeared to be misusing emergency services for a civil dispute. Third, we had all the previous complaints Brenda had sent over the months, none of which had ever resulted in any actual violations. Instead of just complaining to the HOA board, we decided to take more decisive action. My wife drafted a formal complaint that we sent to 3 different places. The other members of the HOA board, the property management company that oversees our HOA, and the county office that handles complaints about misuse of emergency services. The email was precisely worded and completely factual. It outlined Brenda's pattern of harassment, her trespassing on our property, and the serious legal and financial liability she had exposed the HOA to by making false claims to emergency services. We also decided to share a sanitized version of the story on our neighborhood's private social media page. We didn't name Brenda specifically, but we posted about an incident with an HOA board member and encouraged other residents to be aware of their rights regarding property inspections. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, dozens of other residents began sharing their own stories about problems with Brenda. It turned out we weren't the only ones who had been dealing with her harassment. One neighbor described how Brenda had tried to fine him for parking his work truck in his own driveway because it was a commercial vehicle. Another family had been targeted because their children's chalk drawings on their own sidewalk were considered graffiti. The pattern was clear. Brenda had been systematically harassing residents throughout the neighborhood, using her position as HOA president to bully people into compliance with rules that often didn't even exist. The property management company responded first. Within 48 hours, we received a phone call from a regional manager who apologized profusely for Brenda's behavior and assured us that immediate action would be taken. 2 days later, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. My wife and I attended, along with about 30 other residents who had been following the situation on social media. The meeting was short and decisive. The other board members, clearly embarrassed by the negative attention Brenda had brought to the HOA, voted unanimously to remove her from all positions of authority. They also passed a motion requiring all future complaints and inspections to go through proper legal channels with written notification and legitimate cause. Brenda tried to defend herself, claiming she was just trying to maintain community standards. But when faced with the video evidence of her trespassing and the audio of her false 911 call, she had no real argument. The new interim president, a soft-spoken retiree who seemed genuinely interested in making the HOA work for residents rather than against them, personally apologized to everyone who had been affected by Brenda's behavior. But the most satisfying part came about 3 weeks later. I was working in my home office when my wife came in holding an official-looking envelope. She had a big smile on her face. "You're going to love this," she said, handing me the letter. It was from the county office that handles emergency services violations. After reviewing the 911 incident report and the evidence we had submitted, they had determined that Brenda had indeed misused emergency services by making false claims to 911 dispatchers. She had been fined $500 and required to attend a class on proper use of emergency services. The letter also noted that future violations could result in criminal charges for filing false reports. That weekend, my wife and I were sitting in our backyard enjoying the peaceful evening and the herbs from our perfectly legal garden. The whole ordeal had taken about 2 months from start to finish, but it felt like we had achieved something important, not just for ourselves, but for the entire neighborhood. Brenda's attempt to invade our privacy and abuse her authority had backfired completely. Her own actions had led to her downfall, all because she had no idea that the calm, professional voice on the other end of that 911 call belonged to the very person whose home she was trying to force her way into. My wife summed it up perfectly as we watched the sunset. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them hang themselves with their own rope. The neighborhood has been peaceful ever since. The new HOA leadership actually focuses on things that matter: organizing community events, maintaining common areas, and helping neighbors resolve disputes amicably. Brenda moved away about a month after the incident, selling her house to a lovely young couple with 2 kids who love playing in their backyard without worrying about someone timing how long their toys stay outside. As for us, We taught an important lesson about respecting boundaries and the rule of law. Sometimes standing up to entitled people requires patience, documentation, and a little bit of luck. In our case, that luck came in the form of a federal agent who happened to be working dispatch on exactly the right day. We came out on top, and our entire neighborhood is better for it. Update, 6 months later. The full story comes out. I thought the Brenda situation was completely behind us, but I figured I should share an update since so many people have been asking what happened next. Things got even more interesting after my original post. About a month after Brenda moved away, we started hearing rumors through the neighborhood grapevine about why she had been so aggressive with everyone. It turns out there was a lot more going on behind the scenes that none of us knew about. The new HOA board decided to conduct a full audit of the association's finances and records from Brenda's time as president. What they found was pretty shocking. Brenda had been systematically documenting violations throughout the neighborhood, not because she cared about community standards, but because she was trying to build a case for imposing special assessments and fines that would generate extra revenue for the HOA. Her plan, according to documents they found in her files, was to create a pattern of violations that would justify hiring an expensive compliance management company to handle enforcement. The kicker? She had already been in talks with such a company and stood to receive a substantial kickback for bringing them the contract. Essentially, she was planning to turn our peaceful neighborhood into a revenue-generating machine where residents would be constantly fined for minor infractions, with Brenda getting a cut of the profits. The failed inspection of our house was apparently supposed to be her test case. She had planned to find some minor violation, maybe the placement of our security cameras or the height of our herb garden plants, and use it to justify bringing in the enforcement company. When I refused to let her in and the whole thing blew up in her face, it derailed her entire scheme. The audit also revealed that Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for her inspection activities, including gas for driving around the neighborhood looking for violations and supplies for making her official-looking notices. She had spent nearly $800 of HOA money on what was essentially her personal harassment campaign. The board voted to pursue legal action to recover the misused funds, but Brenda's lawyer contacted them a few weeks later offering to settle. She agreed to reimburse the HOA for all the money she had spent, plus an additional $2,000 in damages, in exchange for not pursuing criminal fraud charges. But here's where it gets really good. Remember how my wife was working dispatch rotation as part of that federal task force? Well, it turns out that program exists specifically because there had been issues with people misusing emergency services for non-emergencies. My wife's rotation was part of a pilot program to help identify patterns of abuse and improve response protocols. The incident with Brenda became a case study for the program. My wife was actually asked to present our situation at a training session for other dispatch centers as an example of how to handle calls that appear to be misuse of emergency services. The training now includes specific guidance on identifying when callers are trying to use police as enforcers for civil disputes, and how dispatchers can ask the right questions to determine whether there's actually an emergency. So not only did we solve our immediate problem with Brenda, but our situation is now helping train emergency dispatchers across the state to better handle similar situations. My wife jokes that Brenda inadvertently contributed to improving public safety, though certainly not in the way she intended. The neighborhood has thrived under the new HOA leadership. They organized a community block party last month that brought together families who had never really talked to each other before. Several residents mentioned that they had been afraid to participate in neighborhood activities when Brenda was in charge because they worried about somehow violating her ever-changing rules. One of the best changes is that the new board actually asks residents for input before making decisions. They sent out a survey asking what people wanted the HOA to focus on, and the overwhelming response was community building rather than rule enforcement. They've started a neighborhood watch program, organized group discounts for landscaping services, and even created a shared tool library where residents can borrow things like lawnmowers and power tools instead of everyone having to buy their own. As for our house, we never did get that mandatory inspection Brenda was so insistent about. The new board reviewed all of her previous complaints and found that none of them had any legitimate basis. Our security cameras, herb garden, and everything else were always completely within the rules. I still work from home without any interruptions from clipboard-wielding HOA presidents. My wife finished her dispatch rotation and returned to her regular FBI duties, though she says the experience gave her valuable insight into how emergency services interact with federal law enforcement. We recently celebrated our first full year in the house, and it really does feel like the peaceful home we thought we were buying. The irony isn't lost on us that Brenda's attempt to control and monetize our neighborhood ended up making it a better place for everyone to live. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Brenda thought she was calling 911 to intimidate us into submission. Instead, she called the one person in the entire county who had both the professional training to see through her lies and the personal stake in making sure justice was served. The neighborhood kids still ride their bikes in the street without timing how long they're outside. People leave their trash bins out for an extra hour after pickup without fear of violation notices, and families can enjoy their own backyards without worrying about someone with a clipboard documenting their every move. That's what a real community looks like. Not one where residents live in fear of arbitrary rules enforced by power-hungry bullies, but one where neighbors look out for each other and work together to make their shared space better for everyone. Brenda tried to turn our neighborhood into her personal kingdom, but instead she ended up teaching all of us the importance of standing up to abusive authority. She wanted to profit from making our lives miserable, but in the end, her scheme backfired so completely that it made our community stronger than ever. And the best part? Every time I look at those security cameras that started this whole mess, I smile knowing that they captured the exact moment when Brenda's bullying campaign began to crumble. Sometimes the evidence you need is right there waiting for you. You just have to be smart enough to preserve it and brave enough to use it. We definitely came out on top, and 6 months later, we're still winning. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My dad just shared a story about my late Uncle Dale, his lifelong friend and fellow engineer. So in his memory and in spirit of the upcoming holidays, I present for you the tale of nepotism, engineering students, and Idina Menzel. Uncle Dale was a senior engineer at a small firm in the Midwestern USA and engineering instructor at the local community college. He was also, unofficially, in charge of the office parties. To help offset the costs, he had a small tin box on a table outside of his office with a slot in it so anyone could donate money to the party fund. Everyone knew about it and were happy to donate. A month or so before the company's big Christmas party, Uncle Dale decided to check the box. Lo and behold, it was empty. Uncle Dale knew something was wrong because he had seen several colleagues putting money in the box. This could only mean one thing. Someone was stealing from the party fund. At this moment, Brad, the owner's nephew and a fellow engineer, came around the corner. And something about the way Brad was looking at him made Uncle Dale suspicious. Brad didn't have a good reputation around the office, to say the least. He had a reputation of being pushy, obnoxious, rude, and just plain entitled. Unfortunately, he was not only the owner's beloved nephew, but knew how to skirt the rules so he wouldn't get fired. Uncle Dale decided to set a trap to catch the thief. Using his engineering skills, he set up a hidden rig using a hidden doorbell camera right by the box. He then had a colleague loudly brag about how he contributed $100 to the party fund. Then he waited. He got a notification that the camera was recording and watched Brad open the empty box, scowl in disgust, and throw the box against the wall. Now you'd think this would end with Uncle Dale presenting the video evidence to his boss to get Brad fired, but oh no. As I mentioned in a previous post, if there's one thing engineers love, it's solving problems. And if it's engineering students, they'll make it an experience to remember. Uncle Dale then went to his engineering students. He offered them extra credit to come up with a rigged box that would make noise when opened. The more obnoxious the sound, the higher the bonus. 1 week later, they delivered their project and demonstrated how it worked. Pleased with the results, Uncle Dale awarded them the extra credit as promised. The next day, he set up the rigged box and proclaimed, "Well, isn't this nice? Someone donated $50 to the party fund." Then he went to his office and waited. The engineering students had rigged the box with one of those inserts from cards that play music when you open them. By popular vote, they had picked "Let It Go" from the Disney movie Frozen, right around the time the song was beginning to become unpopular. They also managed to ensure that once opened, the box couldn't close unless you pressed a hidden side button releasing the hinge, so the song would continue to play. For extra funsies, they made sure to angle the insert for maximum volume and secured it down with industrial strength glue. Sure enough, everyone in the office heard Idina Menzel belting the hated song and Brad's frustrated grunts while trying to close the box. One of those attracted by the sound was Brad's uncle. Finally, Brad chucked the box at the wall, managing to put a good-sized dent in it. The uncle then summoned Brad to his office. 15 minutes later, Brad left with a cardboard box and cleared out his desk, along with a note in his file, "Do not rehire, do not recommend." So his engineering career was over. That Christmas, Uncle Dale had a little video prepared to show at the party. The doorbell camera had caught Brad's attempt to steal from the box, all to the tune of "Let It Go." The next one is a malicious compliance story. Reading another post reminded me of this encounter a long time ago when I was 19 or 20. A little backstory, at the time my DL was altered to make me 21, but if you looked close, you could tell. However, the 7-Eleven near my house had previously carded me, so never carded me again. Also in San Diego, there was a huge annual fireworks show that would be set to fire from the stadium in Mission Valley. Those that lived in the area knew there were places on top of the hills overlooking the valley that had an excellent viewpoint of the show, and we'd just sit on the grass and watch it for free. During these events, about 5 streets all closest to this overlook area were blocked off for a block party. The police manned the barricades. To drive in, you had to show ID to prove you lived in the blocked-off section. But anyone can walk or bike in. Now, on this evening, I bought 2 beers for the show with cash. I was on my bike and left my wallet at home. I had about 2/3 of 1 beer already drank when I'm getting close to the barricade. I was thinking the A-bike is still considered a vehicle and having an open container might be illegal. So instead of just biking through, which I could have done easily, I stopped to ask the cop about the open container thing. And instead of answering, she got very confrontational. Also, I later learned that cops assigned to these barricades are the rookies. Here's the dialogue. Rookie, first thing she says. How old are you? Me, 21. Rookie. Let me see some ID. Me. I didn't bring it. I live just 3 blocks from here. Rookie. I need to see ID now. Me. I don't have it. Rookie. You are going to have to dispose of that beer. Me. What? Look, I came up to you to prevent trouble. Rookie. You need to dispose of that beer. Now. Me. Okay. And I chugged the last of that beer. Rookie. No. Not that way. Me. Oh. And gave her my best dumb teenager look. Rookie. She's mad now. What's in the bag? Me. Knowing I couldn't pull that same trick twice. A Pepsi. Rookie. Let me see. Me. Do you have a warrant? I didn't know crap about laws except for what I saw on TV. Rookie. Open the bag. Me. Only if you have a warrant. Rookie. If you don't let me see, I'm going to call for backup. Me. Then call your backup. Rookie. Wait right here. Me. Okay. So about 5 minutes later, a patrol car with 2 male cops pull up on the edge of the barricade and wave me over. One of them talks to me. Male cop. How old are you? Me. 21. Male cop. Go ahead and get out of here. I walked back over to where I parked my bike, gave the rookie a smile, and rode away. I think the rookie was about to have a stroke. This was the big bust of her career getting away. I'm just laughing on the inside, knowing I just got away with crap. The next one is an entitled people story. My father passed, we were very close, and I was his primary caretaker and heir, so I followed his instructions for his funeral. He is from a remote location and wanted to be buried alongside his sibling and parents, so the funeral was held off until weather cooperated. Understanding his family is far afield as they had moved away from this remote location, I, on my own, offered to purchase airline tickets and hotel for his nieces and nephews. I invited my mother, divorced, and my half-sister as well. I extended this offer to pay for hotel and airfare only to his nieces and nephews by name because there are 5 total and only 4 were invited due to one being a bad apple in many ways. Did you know that private ferry companies can ban one guy? That fellow was the best behaved of the group because he stayed away with no drama. The day of the funeral arrives. My half-sister is also there, making a fool of herself in a skin-tight, too small bandage-wrap dress on an overweight body that she insisted my puritanical mother had picked out. A key point is my father had left her a significant chunk of change, even though she had refused to assist in years of care for my father at the end of his life, only contacting him when she wanted to go to his city to see a sporting event that interested her. My divorced mother helped at the very end, especially in the more personal care that he wasn't comfortable having a daughter do. In my funeral speech, I gave my cousin that helped, not the ones from earlier, and my mother credit, as they really did both help. My useless half-sister jumped in and shouted, "I'm also his daughter," when I was thanking them for helping me care for him. It was so inappropriate. The celebration of life had included pictures of her adoption, her wedding, her upbringing. I am younger, so very few pictures exist of me. She was the golden child due to illness, so she had more pictures than I did, and I was his caretaker until the bitter end. My mother had even been invited to our cabin to preview the pictures on the morning of the funeral, and my sister showed up 10 minutes before we had to leave for the funeral setup, after my mother and my husband and I had looked over the pictures, stating she knew she wasn't invited, but wanted to see too. Apparently, she is too important to wait until I finished getting ready. As she is the golden child, my mother immediately invited her in, so I had to stop getting ready and declare we were packing up to get her out. She liked to be violent without consequences. Not just to me. She was a bully that tormented others. So I don't like being anywhere near her. I never got the chance to compose myself for putting my dad in the ground because my sister was too important to help with the funeral or even let me keep my schedule. Then at the funeral, the one thing she wasn't included in was the thanks for caring for him because she refused when asked repeatedly, but that is still not good enough, so she had to shout out at a funeral to get attention back to her when it was distributed amongst family that actually cared for him. She also wandered up right after my mother and I placed his urn and took a picture of his open grave. It was awful. So much more happened. So much more stress during that time. You don't want to do work on your home with an HOA? But my sister and my cousins are pretty much dead to me. I paid for their hotel and airline tickets and don't intend to fund anything for them ever again. I hate people and have gone from low contact to no contact. Oh, and my mother's niece managed to hit me up for money as one of the cousins that ignores me is getting married. They of course did this the day after my father's funeral without even offering condolences. They never contact me unless they want a present. It is really gross. Anyway, thank you for watching. Just days before, less than a week, the funeral, I was informed, not asked, that his nephew was not coming, but they had decided to invite the child of his niece. They told me I met him when I was 7, I am in my 40s, and he was at the funeral of his grandmother, my aunt, a decade ago, and did not talk to us but thought my dad and I were witty. Key point here, he is a millionaire due to his father and has his own company. My husband and I are firmly middle-class wage slaves. I immediately thought they had contacted the hotel and removed the reservation for my father's nephew, whom I had apparently been introduced to once a decade ago and prior to that had not ever had any significant interaction with, and had placed his own name with his own money. Wrong. He decided to take the room I had paid for, and then my father's niece brought her disabled son who could not understand what was happening. I honestly did not know he existed and was told later arrangements were made for his care, but they chose to bring him. I had not booked or paid for double occupancy, raising the bill higher. One of the other nieces then avoided us for lunch to get an early ferry, got pissed when I told her she couldn't check in early just because she grabbed an early boat and spent the night getting pissed drunk before the funeral on the second day. She also idioted because I gave my husband and myself, the only intentional double occupancy, the little backyard cabin with a kitchenette so I could cook a welcome dinner the first day. Apparently free wasn't good enough. These women are 20 years older than me, more than old enough to act like adults. I spent that first evening cooking as the hotel promised a grill, so I brought hamburgers and 2 types of sausages with sides and all the fixings, but the grill did not have the propane canister, and I had a little 1 burner and pans to make do with. I made it work by cooking for an hour. We had brought everything else with us already cooked, so it was just grilling on a flat top. Time-consuming but workable. I got finished cooking and joined the party. I had a single hamburger but had intentionally cooked all the meat I had brought as it was a first in, first out cooking, and I knew I could eat it the rest of the stay. I had even sent out the last batch in a separate pot to mark it as only to be used if the rest was out, as I wanted to take those back for our lunches for the week we were there. Within half an hour of me arriving, my mother told me she was going to clean up and proceeded to try to throw away all our food. I had rotated the burgers and sausages to ensure freshest food would be left over at the end. She got all the meats, but my husband stopped her from tossing the sliced cheese and fresh veggie platters. I then had to spend yet more money to feed myself, my daughter, and my husband as the easy grab food we had planned was trashed.